Oh my gosh. Hey everybody, Uncle Jesse here. Have you seen this post by TGI Kawane over on Reddit where he resin 3D printed this clear Pokemon file and then dipped it in lacquer and it looks amazing? We've got to try that. And I'm really curious about this technique because I believe there's no sanding involved whatsoever. And basically what we're gonna end up doing is just dunking our prints in the lacquer. And obviously we're gonna need some translucent or clear resin for us to work with, but this is just purely translucent. I want this to be tinted with a different color. So I'm gonna bust out my big bag of alcohol inks and start tinting some of the resin. Now, I don't really have any specifics of how many drops you need to apply to actually tint your resin. I just sort of wing it and keep continually adding droplets to the resin until I've got the color that I'm interested in. And I'm gonna be tinting 2 different sets of this translucent resin, and I'm gonna be shooting for a purple as well as an orange. And while everything's printing, I want to take a moment to say thank you to today's video sponsor, which is none other than Elegoo, the makers of the Elegoo Mars 3 and the Mars 3 Pro that I'm going to be printing on in today's video. We're also using their translucent clear resins, which are oh so fun to print with, as well as run off and tint like I'm doing in today's video to come up with your own crazy color combinations. And we're gonna be cleaning off the prints in the Elegoo Mercury X Wash and Cure bundle. If you're interested in more information about Elegoo's Resin 3 printers or any of their other products, you'll find links to those down below. I want to say a huge thank you again to Elegoo for sponsoring today's video. And while everything's still printing, let's run over to Lowe's and see if we can find some of this lacquer. Typically, you're gonna find the lacquer over in the paint section of your home big box stores, whether it's Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot, anything like that, you should be able to find it over in this section here. And what we're on the lookout for is clear gloss lacquer. You might see things like a matte or satin finish, and what we're really looking for is a clear gloss option. Now, once everything's finished printing, it's time to get these models cleaned up. I'm not entirely sure if I should be doing a wash and cure prior to this, but we're gonna go ahead with it anyways and see what the results are like. And we're only gonna let those cure for a minute or two because we don't want the 3D prints to yellow under that UV light. And using a heat gun can make removing your supports so much easier. One issue that I'm running into that you might also face is that my model is too large for me to just straight ahead dunk into this container here. If I had the gallon option, it might be large enough, but even then you might have printed something really large like a mask that you're gonna have to end up brushing on. So what I'm gonna do is I ended up printing the wings and the flame separately here so that I can attach them later on here. And what I think I'm gonna end up doing is attaching the flame tail now with a little bit of extra UV resin, and then separately dunking the wings and the body and then trying to assemble everything after. This should be interesting. Also, make sure you're wearing a respirator while working with this. The fumes are pretty strong. At best case scenario, if you can, work outside or in your garage with the door open, etc., just so it's helping ventilate the fumes out of your area that you're working in. While I'm wearing the respirator, here's a little voiceover action. I'm gonna start by dipping the wings in there and carefully dunking them in, trying to let any of the excess lacquer drip off and then setting it on the side here. I am using a piece of wax paper, hoping that my prints don't actually stick to this once everything's cured. After I've got the wings fully coated, it's time for that flame stand. Now I'm gonna very carefully dunk it in here and then proceed to lose grip of it and drop it to the bottom of the can. Oh my gosh. Thankfully, I was able to grab it with a pair of tweezers and pull it back out and then let it drip dry again. I also use an electric air compressor to help blow off any of the excess lacquer so it's not building up and pooling in any particular area. And then it's time for the main body there. Again, I'm very carefully trying to maneuver this into the can here. This is probably gonna be the biggest challenge that you're gonna run into, is having prints that are small enough to fit inside the openings of the can. If not, you can always use a brush and brush it directly on your prints. All right, so it's been a little over 2 hours, and here are where our prints are at. They're definitely not tacky or anything like that, and I can touch them. They're definitely dry. Not nearly as translucent as I was hoping. I'm definitely gonna be giving this another second coat here. They are pretty clear, and I can see through some of the pieces here, especially the wings are extremely clear compared to the others that I think it's just because this is so thin compared to the thicker parts of the body here. What's also interesting is I'll try to get some of the camera here, but you can also see some of the bubbles that are inside the resin. I don't think I've ever noticed that before. And then the flames look pretty cool. I definitely think these are gonna pop a little bit better with a second coat, so let's do that right now. So I let the prints that we dipped in the lacquer sit overnight, and I have to say they look pretty good. One thing that you need to be mindful of is if you can, try and hang your prints so any of the excess lacquer here will drip off. I have some little thin coats here that I've cured to the pieces on the bottom where it's just kind of pooled off from the base. So I did end up dipping this Gambit bust inside the lacquer just to see what a regular Resin 3D print might look like. And I honestly think it looks pretty cool. It's got a nice glossy coating over it. Not 100% sure if this would have been any better than me just spray painting it. But one big thing to be mindful of is if you've hollowed and added holes to your prints, anytime that you dip the print in the lacquer, you're gonna get a whole bunch of that excess lacquer on the inside. So this is gonna take a handful of days, I'm assuming, for it to fully cure. And even though we were dipping our prints, I wanted to test out brushing it on as well. So I went off and printed a mask here and stand, and I printed with some of this amazing crystal clear neon green fast resin from Sorayatech. And since the prints are too large to dip inside the lacquer, I'm just gonna use a chip brush and test out painting it directly on the prints to see what the results look like. Let's take a look at the results of our little experiment, starting off with that Charzard sculpture. I ended up using just some extra resin along with my UV light pen to cure the wings directly onto the body, and everything adhered properly. It's pretty clear in the wing areas where it's really thin, but in the thicker areas, it's still not quite as translucent, and maybe that has to do with the exact resin that I was using as well as using alcohol inks. Overall, I think it still looks pretty cool, and it's a very nice looking option when it comes to finishing your 3D prints. However, I'm still not 100% sold on this as an option compared to by just using a clear coat spray paint. I honestly think that I'm getting the same results with a lot less mess, as well as it being a good bit cheaper. This spray paint can was maybe $5. This bucket right here, this quart size, which honestly should last a really long time, was $18, $19. And it's gonna be pretty limited to me being able to dunk prints in here. They're gonna have to be pretty small unless I'm wanting to brush them on with something like a chip brush. And speaking of, our little mask statue here turned out pretty great with this option. I ended up being able to actually dunk the hand in the quart of resin, which was pretty fun to be able to maneuver that in there, and everything looks nice and shiny and smooth. And then our mask, I brushed it on with the chip brush and it turned out fantastic. It's, again, really nice and clear. I can definitely see through it better than if I just washed and cured it. However, again, I still think the results are just about as good as I would be able to get by using some spray paint, and the process here is just a good bit messier. It's a lot stinkier. You're gonna definitely need to be able to use this outside, similar to spray paint. However, I just feel like the overall process is a little bit more labor intensive, if you will. I ended up printing all of the base files for the prints as well on the Elegoo Neptune 3, which I love. And of course, I ended up scaling the base for the hand sculpture just the wrong size. It was the default scale, and I ended up scaling up everything for this print here at 130% scale. So I'm gonna attempt to print this off and put the finished photos here or video clips in the video that you're watching now. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that was able to get done. And I'm really glad I tried this little experiment, even though I'm not 100% sold on the whole workflow process of finishing the prints. The results look fantastic with this clear lacquer, especially if you have smaller prints that you can dunk directly in the lacquer. And I also wanted to take a minute to say thank you to all my Patreon supporters for your continued support. If you're interested in my Resin 3D printer settings, you can find those over in my Patreon. And let me know what you think about using clear lacquer to finish your 3D prints down below. And if you have any other tips and suggestions on how best you could finish these 3D prints to overall improve the clarity of them, especially when printing with those translucent resins. Hey, thanks so much for watching, y'all, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.